This video is brought to you by MoviePalette.com. Hey everyone, do you have a favorite movie that you would love to hang on your wall but you can't think of what scene or what poster to get? Well, now you can get the entire movie on one high quality canvas. With MoviePalette.com, you can get every scene from your favorite movie, or more specifically, the dominant color of every scene from your favorite movie in chronological order on a great high quality canvas. It also comes with a silver engraving of the title down at the bottom. It has rubber stoppers on the back to keep it from bouncing. And they have a huge catalog of what to choose from. Whether you're a horror fan or a fan of sci-fi, Marvel, Japanese anime, Disney animation, drama, or Oscar classics, there's a movie palette for you. And right now, MoviePalette.com is having a sale for 50% off for their Halloween sale. But if you go right now and if you enter room 15, you'll get 15% off of the movie palette of your choice. That's ROOM15 for 15% off of your movie palette. Again, this is a great value for a great piece of home decor that looks great for any film and for any film buff and anywhere in your home. You will definitely like this product. Mine is of The Shining, and I could not be happier with it. So definitely go to MoviePalette.com and enter ROOM15 for 15% off of your palette. Hey horror fans, welcome back to 237, back with another review. As I continue my month of October run through of Stephen King film adaptations, and this is one I'm sure everyone has been waiting for me to get to, probably even outside of this month of October run through. Probably wondering why I haven't got to it yet in general. I mean, it's the highest grossing horror movie of all time at this point, I believe. Probably most people's favorite Stephen King film. It's one of the most iconic characters. I know it's one of my girlfriend's favorite movies. Pretty much her favorite movie character. And people like to use the term remake. I don't like to use that term because it's not using the original as the source material. It is based on the book. So, like Carrie, Pet Sematary, other ones, it's not a remake. It's another adaptation. But it's 2017's It. Now, I saw this in theaters back in 2017, so it's been a while. Haven't seen it since, other than just now. And I gotta say, I enjoyed it more than I did in theaters. When I saw it in theaters, I was very mixed on it. Now, of course, it's based on the mammoth book, It, from, I believe, 1986. It is, I believe, next to The Stand, this is his largest work. I read the book in elementary school. I didn't really understand a lot of it, and I have forgotten most of it. But I do remember a lot of the key elements. I will say up front, I'm not a fan of the 1990 TV miniseries. I know people will want to revoke my horror fan card for saying that. I think it's incredibly overrated. I still enjoy the kid half, part 1. I think part 2 is really bad and does not hold up. But I saw this when I was a young kid. It was scary, and then I just kind of grew out of it. I see it as a good gateway horror film for kids. But they did what they could for this, weirdly structured mammoth of a book by TV standards. And I think they did a much better job with this. I will say this is a much better version of the story, film-wise. Of course, I also have It Chapter 2, which I have seen. This will not be the next review. I mean, it's 3 hours long. And there's other ones I want to check out. Like there's the If It Bleeds adaptation dropping to Netflix October 5th with Bill. The kid that played Bill in this film. Of course, it doesn't have the cast on the back. I think it's called Mr. Harrigan's Phone or something. There's other ones I want to get to. Now, of course, this movie was in development hell for almost a decade. I think around 2009 it was talked about readapting. It shifted so many different directors, eventually landing on Andy Muschietti. I know at one point, I can never remember his name. The kid from Where the Millers, he was also in Midsummer. Will Poulter. He was supposed to be Pennywise, but we got Bill Skarsgård. And I'll say I really like Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise. I think there's a lot more things about him that make sense story-wise. I mean, Tim Curry is still iconic. He's still an iconic character. He definitely made it his own. But it really just comes off as an evil clown in a very modern, sort of generic birthday party clown suit. Skarsgård's costume has more of like a vaudevillian look to it, which makes him look more timeless, which I really like. His makeup, that kind of grin that goes up, actually plays into his actual, like the structure of his face when he actually opens it up. His voice, his demeanor, I think is actually creepier than Tim Curry's. Tim Curry does go over the top, especially part 2. But there's more with Skarsgård that works than doesn't. I know there's a lot of CGI on him, even though he is a very physical actor. He actually can do that thing with his lip and his eye, but they still did a lot of CGI. Another thing that I really like about this film is it doesn't just do a creepy clown movie, which this one was very guilty of. I've said this before, I'm not a fan of clown horror movies. I think it's a very cheap gimmick because so many people will just see a clown and automatically think it's scary because it's a clown. Even though in the book, Pennywise is just its favorite form. It takes many different forms based on what your fear is. This movie really explores that a lot more, which I really appreciated. I think it does do a better job at exploring the bond of these kids, and the kid cast is excellent. Every kid in this movie is awesome. All 7 losers. The kid that plays Henry is a great psychopathic bully. He was great. There was some things like Mike doesn't really have a lot to do at all. In fact, they even gave the historian part of his character to Ben. He's in the beginning of the film, and then he comes in at the rock fight towards the 3rd act. So he doesn't really have much to do. They definitely expand on the characters more. Like, they really dig into the Munchausen syndrome by proxy for Eddie. Not so much physical, but definitely the sexual abuse of Bev by her father. That's done in a very realistically scary way. Probably my favorite scene as far as... because the first act or so, like the first half, I guess, is kind of as repetitive as the TV version, where we just kind of see one by one how each one of the losers encounters Pennywise. So it kind of gets repetitive. But my favorite is the scene with Bev in the bathroom. Being a blood guy, that scene was awesome. Looked great. Looked fantastic. Which is a testament to Andy Muschietti as a director. I think the direction was the best that it could have been. Which structurally, I like how they ignored the structure of the book. The 1990 version tried it, but it was a better choice not to skip and jump between time frames. Just open up and shoot it straight as kids, and then do chapter 2 as adults, no bouncing back and forth. I thought that worked better. Now, I will say, I get why they set it in the 80s, so that when they come back as adults, it's more present day. But, and also because Stranger Things was monumentally popular at the time. You even have Finn Wolfhard as Richie, and they're riding around on their bikes the whole movie. So that 80s nostalgia, kids on bikes, setting it in the 80s, also makes sense, but I would have really liked to see them set it back in the 50s. I mean, I personally, I would have much preferred that. But overall, I think it was a very well-made movie as far as a horror movie goes. My main issue with it, and it was more prevalent in the theater, obviously, is that it's one of those horror movies that tells you when to be scared, because every scare moment has just the loudest a music sting. It's punctuated by music, or there's things right up in front of the camera, or moving around really fast. It tells you when to be scared. Of course, it was more prevalent in the theater, but almost 10 minutes in, I haven't even gone through the main shit yet. So yeah, directed by Andy Muschietti, screenplay by Chase Palmer, Cary Fukunaga, and Gary Dauberman. I know Cary Fukunaga was going to be one of the directors at one point, I think. Now it stars Jaden Lieberer, if I pronounce that correctly, as Bill. I liked him in The Lodge, which was one of my favorite horror movies of the 2010s. He's going to be in that new Mr. Harrigan's Phone film. He was great as Bill. I think everyone in this movie was better than their 1990 counterpart. Though I think maybe some of Richie's one-liners in 1990 by Seth Green were funnier. He did have some funny lines in here, but sometimes it was a bit too much. Either it really shifted the tone when there was something really serious or scary. I didn't really care for any of his voices that he did. And I get it, he's the loudmouth, he's supposed to do that, but I think it threw the tone off on certain scenes. Of course, Bill Skarsgård as It, or as Pennywise. Jerry Ray Taylor as Ben Hanscom. Sophia Lillis as Bev. When I first saw this, my first thought was, for the love of God, if there is a God, someone will please cast her as Carrie Kelly in some Batman movie before she's too old. No, it can't be the Pattinson movies, because that's not the Frank Miller verse. It's got to be when he's older. It would have been ideal for like the Snyder films, but she is perfect for Carrie Kelly. She did great as Bev in this. Of course, Finn Wolfhard as Richie, Wyatt Oleff as Stan, Chosen Jacobs as Mike, Jack Dylan Grazer as Eddie, who was my favorite character in this. He was also great in Shazam, but his performance as Eddie, and just Eddie as a character, was always my favorite. And I think as far as the losers go, his performance outshined the rest of them. And I actually thought he was funnier than Richie. So he was excellent. Nicholas Hamilton as Henry, who, again, I mean, the guy just looks like a psycho. He was great. And then Jackson Robert Scott as Georgie. You did have Javier Botet as the leper, who, I mean, anytime there's a giant character in a horror film, they get him. And I wanted to see who played Stephen Bogart as Alvin Marsh. I can't click on his name, but he looked like Patrick Bateman's lawyer in American Psycho. So yeah, that's the long cast. I wanted to give everybody credit because they all really deserve it. Uh, Chung Hoo Chung did the cinematography, and Benjamin Wallfish did the music. Of course, made for 35 to 40 million, grossed 701.8 million. So yeah, highest grossing horror movie of all time, uh, highest grossing Stephen King film of all time, highest since The Shining back in 1980, even when adjusted for inflation. Now, the filming, I said this for Cujo, which was shot in California, but they made it look like Maine. Of course, this takes place in Derry, Maine. It was shot in, I think, New York and Ontario. It looks just like Bangor, Maine. And I know Bangor was the main inspiration, town-wise, for Stephen King when he wrote the book. It even has the Paul Bunyan statue. Even some of the history that Ben talks about, things that happened in Derry, are things that actually did happen in Bangor. The, the whole, how the sewer system is crazy, like just mazes that just goes throughout the whole town. That's what it's like in Bangor. So they really made it look and feel like Bangor. I will say they didn't go too over the top with the 80s nostalgia. I mean, yeah, there's a few scenes with New Kids on the Block, but it's mostly just like a marquee that says, Batman or Lethal Weapon 2 or Elm Street 5 to really put you in the 80s. The biggest standout, other than just the design of the film to make it look like Maine, will be the acting. The acting and just the overall direction. It's a great looking film. I really commend Andy Muschietti and the writers for just choosing to shoot it straight, just the kids first. And it is the best group of kids together movie since stuff like Stand By Me or The Goonies. I mean, these kids worked so wonderfully together. Their chemistry is impeccable. And I really appreciated that. It really felt like, something like The Goonies or Stand By Me. Again, as I've said before, I really like Skarsgård as Pennywise. And how it really establishes how each kid has their own fear. I mean, with Eddie, he turns into the leper. The whole blood coming out of the sink with Bev. I thought that was supposed to represent her period. Maybe kind of like a little Carrie thing. Because when she first runs into the losers, she's buying tampons. And, the whole scene with her dad touching her hair, so she goes in and cuts it. And then she pulls the hair out of the drain, and that's when blood goes everywhere. And again, the way that's shot, best scene of the movie. But yeah, the leper, the blood in the sink, Stan's painting, the lady in the painting, which, yeah, the CGI is a bit overdone even on the leper. But I guess what's really keeping me from saying the CGI was awful and way too obvious and it took me out of it was because Andy Muschietti said he wanted Pennywise to look surreal and otherworldly. I mean, he is a cosmic entity, so I guess it would make sense that it looks not real, I guess. So I guess the CGI kind of helped it. I mean, you look at this, he does look just like a guy in a clown suit, which also Gacy was sort of the inspiration for why this entity chooses to be a clown. Which, another thing, and I know some people have complained about Skarsgård's eye going off or how he's kind of glitchy. Like, even in the scene when he's talking to Georgie and it's like he stops for a moment, the way Skarsgård interpreted it as is it's an entity pretending to be a clown. So it's going to be off. There's going to be glitches. There's going to be weird quirks. So I thought that was interesting. I thought that made sense. And it does kind of have your typical structure where it shows, okay, the the losers club forming, and then them they all realize that there's something going on in the town. They got to do something about it. It's their bond that brings them together, makes them stronger. There's the conflict when they split up and they get weaker, and then they come back for the final battle. I will say the ending to this one felt more like an ending because it was more like the book where they do like the blood oath. It is kind of a like we'll meet again, Spider-Man. Like it doesn't look like they actually killed him. It does just look like he was weakened, which I guess would prompt, if it's not dead, we all got to come back. It's not like they believe he's actually dead, and I know that's in the book. But I also think the final fight with Pennywise was done somewhat better. I mean, they did have more of a plan in the first film. Here, they just kind of take the cattle gun and they're kind of just winging it. But it does play on, like, if you believe, then you can make it happen. Like how Bill has the cattle gun. Mike shouts how it's not loaded. He says he doesn't care, and so when he pulls the trigger, it's like he shot him. But another thing is, when they're all kind of just beating on Pennywise, he's kind of getting passed around to all of them. Every time they give a blow to him, his head turns into their fear. So, like, with Ben, he turns into a mummy. With Bev, he turns into her dad. They hit him, he kind of bounces over to Eddie, so he turns into the leper. Excuse me, which is symbolic of them conquering their fear. Okay, so that makes sense. And I know the whole movie and story itself is kind of a metaphor of the loss of innocence, but also how that happens when you grow older. Like when you go from a child to in adolescence. This kind of the whole metaphor for it, kind of how your imagination, you can either look at it as maturing or diminishing. I think that was captured more here. It does delve more into, which I appreciated because every time I watched this, I thought it was kind of random and not delved into it all. The whole thing about Derry being cursed, like how everyone kind of knows what's going on, they just turn a blind eye to it and just let it happen. That was delved into more with this. And of course, it is more like the book, which, in the case of The Shining, is not a good thing. But I mean, you look at how ridiculously huge this thing is. Everything that was in the first movie is in the book, but there's just so much of it. This delves deeper into it. No, it doesn't have the underage gangbang, thankfully. No, it doesn't have the scene where the bullies light farts, and then there's the scene between Patrick and Henry that doesn't go well. Doesn't have those scenes, thankfully. But and I thought it was a really well-made movie. The only thing that was really holding me back, both when I saw it in theaters and to a lesser extent now, was how it handled its scares. I mean, almost all the scare scenes could have been handled, maybe more atmospherically, more subtly, like Stan's fear of the lady in the painting. Even that was bombastically loud and in your face. That could have been something, creeping around in the shadows, been more atmospheric. The whole thing about You'll Float Too and how all the dead kids are still floating down in the sewer. I like how they did his deadlights more in this one. And yeah, Pennywise still does some silly things, like when he does his hoedown dance. But for the most part, I think everything Bill does as Pennywise works. You know, all like the weird little glitchy things he does, like his eye going off, or the way he talks. I do think his voice was creepier. He actually felt more like a clown, I guess. I mean, Tim Curry, he has an iconic voice, an iconic demeanor that he brought to Pennywise. But here, this does feel like a clown from the circus. And the circus, I think, was more of a theme with his character than in the original film. You know, even though it's well made, I don't know if I would still put this in my top 10 Stephen King movies or Stephen King adaptations. It's one that's grown on me. And I mean, my girlfriend loves it so much. A lot of my living room will be Pennywise eventually. Which is fine. But it's one that's grown on me, maybe because of that, but also because maybe watching it at home, it kind of quieted a lot of the scare scenes. It did make it more subtle. But I remember the teaser for this, which was the scene when Bev goes back to her childhood home, and there's the old lady that lives there, and just in the background, out of nowhere, you just hear her kind of pass by, doing something creepy. There's no music. Of course, they did ruin that scene in the final version, but yeah, I feel like there could have been a lot more subtle, creepier scenes. I do think maybe Richie was a little too over the top. I'd say 75% of Richie I did think was funny, but sometimes a little much. I actually thought Eddie was funnier. But the way it followed the book more, the way it delved into its themes and the story itself, you know, Derry being cursed and adults either not being able to see or knowing what's going on and not caring. The way Pennywise can actually can and does shapeshift. You know, not when they're all talking about things they've seen, they do realize that the clown is kind of the common theme, but the overall fear of each one, you know, they do get something different. Just eventually turns into a clown. I like how it's not just a scary clown movie, even though it is, but it delves more into how he can shapeshift. Again, Bill as Pennywise, both in look and performance, especially the scene, the whole sequence at the house on Nebolt Street. There's this great upward shot where he's going after Eddie, kind of mocking an asthma attack, and the music kind of goes with him as he does like this, dong, dong, as he's walking towards him. I really like that. The direction is stylish. You know, there is a flair for how the shots are composed and the way it looks. But what really sells it, and it's huge for a movie like this, not just the monster being done well, but the performances of the kids and their chemistry. That is just as monumental to this movie as Pennywise himself. And I think they nailed it. If not more than Pennywise, I think that is the most well-accomplished thing of this film, is the kid actors' performances and their chemistry together. I mean, you really buy that their bond is needed to help conquer this thing. And, you know, it also makes Henry more of like a psychopathic villain. Because in the TV version, it seemed like he wanted to kill all of them just because of the rock fight. It hints at being abused by his dad. Here, it really shows all that. It shows what his home life is like and how he's driven to kill his dad. and then driven to kill the losers. Again, Henry was done just as well. I really bought him as a psycho. If there's any complaints whatsoever, it really is, and only is, maybe less CGI, even though I get why it works. But definitely the scares, there could have been more subtlety and atmosphere to the scares. And I do wonder what it would have been like if they kept it 1950s. They still could have done, you know, the 80s as adults, but I get it. Adults in the 80s is not as nostalgic as kids on bikes with Finn Wolfhard. That's more Stranger Things than having adults do it. But I still wonder what that would have been like. So overall, I think this is a very well-made, and I'd say well-deserved adaptation that people will call a remake. You know, the 2013 Carrie was not needed, and it proved itself. So, Pet Sematary, I liked in its own way, but I guess take it or leave it. It's more moody and atmospheric, but it was always something that could have used a theatrical R-rated version, because there's just so much in the book and there's just so many places it could have gone. And this is definitely the way to do it. And also, just because I know someone else is going to say it, I meant to say it earlier. Yes, in the TV version, it's 30 years between, or 30 years of a hibernation period. Here, it's 27, like in the book. And 27 years is the time frame between the 1990 TV movie and this film. And it feels more, it kind of feels more like fate rather than planned, because it was in development hell for so long that just by chance it finally got made after 27 years. But yeah, while I wouldn't put it in my top 10 Stephen King movies, or I might put it as a top 10 adaptation, like just how well it serves the source material. That I could probably put it in for a top 10. But favorite movies overall, there's just other ones that I would put over it. But it's still very well made. I definitely think Skarsgård is a better Pennywise than Tim Curry. I'm sorry. Yes, he is iconic, and he will always... his Pennywise will transcend me and everyone else. It will continue on as being an icon. But just, you know, his personality and the look of him, I think, works better for the story. It works better for the character. Again, I like his costume a lot more. It looks more timeless. And, yeah, overall, it's very decent. And it's grown on me a lot since when I first saw it in theaters. So, yeah, eventually, at some point this month, I will get to the 1990 miniseries. This is not one that I'll have to watch again to refresh myself, because I've seen it so much as a kid. This might take a little bit because it is 3 hours, and I have only seen it once. But, like the TV miniseries, this was well made. This either kind of had the same fate as the TV series, but that's my review for the 2017 version of It, which I do think is superior. And maybe I will give this another refreshing read. But, I mean, of course, and actually, funny enough to mention, this is just as long as this, which just goes to show how much material is in the book. But, in any case, still a decent film. Stay tuned for more Stephen King adaptations throughout the month of October, and thank you for watching.